The winter winds of Boston had a way of cutting through even the thickest coats. They carried with them a biting chill and a certain heaviness. This invisible weight seemed to press down on Charlotte Johnson's shoulders as she stepped off the crowded bus and approached the city employment center. Her boots crunched against frozen slush on the sidewalk, each step echoing the relentless passage of time. Bills were piling up back at her apartment in Roxbury, and her mother's medical treatments loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. It had been 3 long, suffocating months since she lost her Seaport hotel job. Downsizing, they'd called it. Corporate restructuring. Words that sounded neat and logical when delivered by a suited manager, but felt like knives slicing into her reality. For Charlotte, those 3 months had meant counting coins for groceries, rationing electricity, and pretending on the phone that everything was fine whenever her mother asked if she was eating well. She was 29 years old with a college degree she'd fought tooth and nail to earn through night classes and years of experience managing staff. Yet, in the eyes of the world, she was invisible. A resume no one wanted to read, a woman no one wanted to hire. The fluorescent lights buzzed like restless insects inside the employment office, bathing everything in a sickly yellow glow. The waiting area smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale hope. Plastic chairs, their surfaces cracked and worn, lined the walls like soldiers resigned to a battle they could never win. Charlotte clutched her resume, a once crisp document, now softened by the countless times she had folded and unfolded it, as if she could convince the paper to transform into a ticket to salvation by sheer touch. Behind the counter sat Mrs. Keene, a woman whose permanent scowl made it seem as though hope itself offended her. Her blouse bore the stain of too many hurried cups of coffee, and her tone carried the clipped sharpness of someone who had long forgotten kindness. "You again," Mrs. Keene muttered without looking up from her computer screen. Charlotte straightened her spine, even though fatigue pulled her down. "Yes, I was hoping. Still nothing suitable for someone with your limited background." The words stung. Limited background. It was as if the 5 years she had spent supervising a hotel's housekeeping department counted for nothing. It was as if the nights of balancing budgets, coordinating staff, and extinguishing one crisis after another had evaporated into thin air. As if her degree earned after long hours of study while working 2 jobs was just a piece of paper with no weight. Charlotte tightened her grip on the resume until the edges bent. "There has to be something. I can manage, organize, and clean. I'm capable." Mrs. Keene's eyes glimmered with something cruel, almost amused. "Well, there is one position." She dragged out the words as though savoring them. "But no one has lasted. The posting has been here for months." Charlotte leaned forward. "I'll take anything." Mrs. Keene slid a paper across the desk. "Live-in household manager. $85,000 a year, room and board included. But," she paused for effect, "it's at Roy Martinez's estate." The name hit Charlotte like a blow. Roy Martinez. Everyone in the city knew the name. The billionaire real estate tycoon. The man who had inherited his father's empire and carved it into something even sharper, colder, more ruthless. The press called him the Ice King of Manhattan. He was known for firing half his workforce with the stroke of a pen, demolishing community centers to erect gleaming glass towers, and burning household staff like matches. Charlotte hesitated. She had heard the stories, employees fleeing in tears, managers who lasted less than a week. One woman supposedly quit before the end of her first day, her suitcase still sitting by the front door. Mrs. Keene smirked. The smart thing would be to wait for another opening. Something less brutal. But desperate people don't always make wise choices. Desperate. The word clawed at Charlotte's chest. She thought of the eviction notice folded in her purse. She thought of her mother's voice over the phone, gentle yet weary, insisting, "Don't worry about me, baby. I'll figure something out." Her throat tightened. She couldn't let her mother figure it out alone. "I'll take it," she said, surprising herself with her firm tone. Mrs. Keene raised an eyebrow. "You're sure you're not walking into a job? You're walking into a lion's den." Charlotte lifted her chin. Then it's time to face the lion. 2 days later, a yellow taxi carried Charlotte away from Boston's snow-dusted streets and toward a world that felt like another universe. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the skyline of Manhattan, rising like a steel cathedral against the winter sky. But the driver didn't stop there. He veered eastward, leaving behind the restless city until the narrow roads of the Hamptons unfurled before them, lined with towering evergreens and gates that hid secrets behind wrought iron. "Fancy place." The driver whistled low as the car approached an estate whose entrance looked more like a fortress than a home. Charlotte pressed her face to the window. The mansion stretched across 12 manicured acres, all clean lines and glass walls gleaming beneath the pale afternoon sun. It was breathtaking, yes, but in the way of a museum. Cold, untouchable. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Could she live here? Could a place this pristine ever become a home? The driver pulled up to the circular drive where marble statues stood guard beside fountains frozen mid-spray. Charlotte's 2 battered suitcases looked pitiful against the backdrop of opulence. Everything she owned her entire life, compressed into 2 faded bags. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman with silver hair pulled tightly into a bun greeted her with the precision of a soldier. "Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. "I'm Helen Torres, Mr. Martinez's assistant. I'll show you to your quarters and review your responsibilities." Charlotte followed Helen into a vast foyer that could have swallowed her entire apartment. A staircase curved upward like a piece of art. Every corner gleamed. White marble silver accents walls of glass. Beauty stripped of warmth. As they walked through room after immaculate room, Helen spoke without glancing back. "Mr. Martinez is exacting about his routines. He rises at 5:30, black coffee at 5:45, breakfast at 6 precisely, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. He retires to his study by 9. Your role is to ensure these rhythms are never disrupted." Her heels clicked against marble, punctuating every word. "Your responsibilities include coordinating the cleaning service, supervising the groundskeeper, organizing meals, and ensuring the estate runs flawlessly. Here," Helen handed her a thick folder, "are the house rules. Memorize them. Mr. Martinez doesn't tolerate mistakes." Charlotte clutched the folder, its weight heavy in her hands. 47 rules. She hadn't even opened it yet, but she could feel its suffocating grip already. When they reached the staff wing, Helen stopped before a door and opened it with a flourish. "This will be your room." Charlotte stepped inside and froze. It was larger than her entire apartment back in Roxbury. A sitting area, a private bathroom, windows overlooking gardens, sculpted like something from Versailles. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Helen's expression remained unreadable. "Mr. Martinez believes in treating staff well as long as they meet his standards. Those who fail do not last." Charlotte turned, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "What happened to the others?" For the first time, Helen's mask slipped just slightly. A flicker of pity passed across her face. They discovered they weren't suited for the position. Charlotte frowned. "What does that mean?" Helen hesitated, then said quietly, "Mr. Martinez is complicated. Hurt people hurt others. My advice, don't take anything personally. Do your job perfectly, and perhaps, just perhaps, you'll be the one who lasts." With that, she left Charlotte standing in the room alone. Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed, softer than anything she'd ever slept on, and stared at the ceiling. The silence was suffocating, the kind that pressed in around you until your heartbeat became deafening. She could see a faint glow across the estate through the window, the light from Roy Martinez's study. The man everyone feared. The man who would decide whether she rose or broke. She thought of her mother's weary voice, the medical bills stacked on the counter, the eviction notice tucked in her purse. This job wasn't just a chance, it was survival. All she had to do was endure the Ice King. But a small, stubborn part of her whispered, maybe she could do more than endure. Suppose you're already swept into Charlotte's journey. In that case, her courage, her desperation, and the dangerous new world she's stepping into, don't forget to like this story, leave a comment with your thoughts, and follow the channel so you'll be here tomorrow for the next chapter. Trust me, you won't want to miss how the Ice King makes his entrance. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the silence at 5:15 in the morning, though Charlotte had been awake long before it rang. Sleep had eluded her. Instead, she lay staring at the ornate ceiling of her new quarters, her mind rehearsing every possible scenario of how her first morning would unfold. Her hands trembled slightly as she dressed. She chose her best outfit, a black blazer paired with a modest pencil skirt, clothes that had accompanied her through countless interviews. The fabric bore the faint wear of time, but was clean-pressed and professional. More importantly, it made her feel like she belonged in this palace of glass and marble, even if she was far from convinced. The house was eerily quiet when she stepped into the corridor. Every footstep echoed along the polished marble floors like an intrusion. The silence was not comforting. It was the silence of a museum. After closing hours, a silence that warned rather than welcomed. She reached the kitchen, its gleaming countertops and stainless steel appliances so spotless they looked untouched. Everything stood in perfect order, as though frozen in time. Helen's voice echoed in Charlotte's memory. Coffee at 5:45. Black. No sugar. Don't be late. Her fingers moved carefully, pulling out the premium beans and grinding them. The soft hum of the machine was the only sound in the cavernous space. She poured the coffee into a delicate porcelain cup that seemed wrong for her work-roughened hands to touch. At precisely 5:45, the rich aroma filled the air. She took a steadying breath. This was the first test. The sound of measured footsteps drifted from the grand staircase, deliberate and unhurried. Each one fell like a countdown. Charlotte's pulse quickened as she positioned the cup on the counter, smoothing her skirt with nervous fingers. And then he entered. Roy Martinez appeared in the doorway, with the presence that altered the air in the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly mussed, as though he had run his fingers through it too many times. He was always immaculate in photographs. Tailored suits, polished shoes, the mask of control. But in the soft light of dawn, there was a dissonance. The lines around his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and there was a heaviness to his movements that no camera had ever captured. His pale blue eyes swept over her, sharp and assessing. They reminded her of the winter sky, beautiful but merciless. Ms. Johnson. His voice was deep, resonant, and controlled. It gave nothing away. I trust your accommodations were satisfactory. Charlotte nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Thank you. She held out the cup of coffee. For a moment, her hand brushed against his as he accepted it. His skin was cool to the touch, his grip steady. He lifted the cup, sipped, and paused. Charlotte held her breath, every nerve taut. His expression remained unreadable, though she thought she caught the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. Or perhaps she only imagined it. He said Helen briefed you on the morning routine, though it was not a question. Yes, sir. Breakfast at 6. Would you prefer the usual? The usual will be fine. He moved toward the tall windows, overlooking the gardens. His back to her, now a silhouette against the pale wash of early light. Charlotte exhaled softly, her hands trembling as she turned to the stove. Breakfast was prepared with meticulous care. Steel-cut oats with fresh berries, whole grain toast, and orange juice, squeezed from fruit that gleamed like jewels in the refrigerator. She laid everything on the table as though arranging offerings for a deity who demanded perfection. Roy sat silently scanning the morning's reports on a sleek tablet, the glow reflecting in his cold blue eyes. He ate without comment, and his movements were efficient, precise, and economical, as though even eating was another business transaction. Charlotte busied herself with cleaning around him carefully, staying within invisible boundaries. She did not linger, did not hover. She remembered the warnings from Helen from the cleaning staff she had briefly met the day before. Do not try to get personal. Do not ask questions. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Still, she couldn't stop herself from stealing glances at him. Something unsettling about his solitude was how he seemed encased in an invisible shell. The mansion was immaculate, yes, but it felt hollow. There were no photographs on the walls, no keepsakes that whispered of a life lived. The piano in the living room had gathered a faint layer of dust. Like the man, the house seemed more like a fortress than a home. At exactly 7:30, he rose. I'll be in meetings until lunch. The cleaning service arrives at 9. Please direct them to focus on the guest wing. I'm expecting visitors next week. Charlotte inclined her head. Of course, sir. And for lunch? He paused at the doorway, his gaze returning to her. Something light. Surprise me. His voice carried a subtle weight, as if the words were a test. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. I like challenges, Mr. Martinez. For the first time, a ghost of something that might have been a smile brushed across his lips. We'll see. And then he was gone. At 9 sharp, the cleaning service arrived 2 women, Maria and Sophie, both efficient, both wary. They worked quickly, polishing surfaces that gleamed, scrubbing corners that had never known dust. As Charlotte assisted them, she caught the tension in their voices. Be careful, Maria murmured as they dusted the dining room. The last girl moved one of his books just a few inches. He noticed. She was gone by evening. Sophie nodded grimly. And the one before that. She used the wrong cleaner on his bathroom mirrors. Fired the same day. Charlotte frowned. And the one before her. The women exchanged uneasy glances. She lasted 3 weeks, Maria said softly. Longest of anyone. But she tried to get close. Asked about his family. About his life. He doesn't like personal. Fired her the next day. Charlotte absorbed their words, her chest tightening. Do your job. Don't ask questions. Don't try to connect. Invisible. Safe. But as she walked through the silent halls, memorizing rules and routines, she couldn't quiet the questions blooming inside her. Why did a man with everything live in such emptiness? What kind of loneliness echoed through a beautiful house yet so hollow? And why, despite the warnings, did she feel an inexplicable urge to know the man behind the mask? The day wore on in a rhythm Charlotte quickly learned to follow. Lunch was prepared with precision, a delicate salad with roasted chicken served with a citrus vinaigrette. Roy ate quietly again, offering no comment, though his empty plate spoke volumes. Afternoon bled into evening. Charlotte arranged dinner pan-seared salmon with seasonal vegetables, careful to present it exactly at 7 o'clock. Roy arrived, his expression unreadable. His tie loosened only slightly after hours of relentless calls. The meal passed in silence. And yet Charlotte noticed small details. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly when the music of her careful humming filled the room. As she worked in the kitchen, the faintest softening around his eyes when he caught her straightening the silverware with unnecessary precision. When he finally excused himself to study at 9, she watched his retreating figure with relief and curiosity. Later, alone in her quarters, Charlotte sat at the small desk by her window. She could see the light still burning in Roy's study, a steady glow against the darkness of the estate. She thought of how he had looked at her when she accepted his challenge at breakfast. The almost smile that had brushed across his lips, the fleeting crack in the ice. She reminded herself of the rules: stay invisible, professional, and safe. And yet, as the night deepened and the house settled into silence, Charlotte couldn't ignore the truth whispering in her heart. She had taken this job out of desperation, but something told her that surviving Roy Martinez would not be enough. Something told her that she might be the one to see the man beneath the Ice King's mask. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the most dangerous challenge of all. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of the mansion, spilling pale light across its marble floors. Charlotte moved quietly through the corridors, her footsteps muted by rugs woven so finely they seemed more like artwork than fabric. It was her third day at the Martinez estate, and the house rhythm had already begun to shape her movements. Coffee at 5:45, breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. Every detail calibrated like the ticking of a clock. And yet, despite her adherence to the schedule, Charlotte couldn't shake the sensation of walking through a mausoleum. The house, for all its grandeur, felt lifeless. The rooms were perfect, symmetrical, spotless, and empty of anything resembling warmth. That morning, after clearing away Roy's breakfast dishes, she found herself wandering into the grand living room. The space stretched upward with high ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. Glass walls let in the soft winter light, which slid across gleaming surfaces and polished stone. At the center of it all sat a piano, an ebony Steinway, majestic and gleaming beneath a faint veil of dust. Charlotte stopped. Her breath caught. The sight stirred something in her, a memory of evenings long ago, when her mother, before illness, before hospital bills, would hum softly. At the same time, Charlotte stumbled through simple melodies on an old second-hand upright. Her mother had always said music fed the soul, filling spaces too large for words. Her fingers itched. She knew she shouldn't. Helen's rules echoed in her mind. No entering rooms without explicit permission. No unnecessary interaction. No personal indulgence. The piano was not her business. It belonged to the Ice King. But Charlotte's hand rose anyway, almost of its own accord. She brushed her fingertips lightly along the smooth keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. Just enough to feel the cool ivory beneath her skin. "Are you a musician, Miss Johnson?" The voice sliced through the silence. Charlotte spun, her heart hammering. Roy Martinez stood in the doorway, his pale eyes fixed on her hand still resting on the keys. He had crept. She hadn't heard him approach. I'm sorry," she stammered, withdrawing her hand as though burned. "I wasn't—" "Answer the question." His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of command. Charlotte steadied herself. She refused to let fear make her small. "I played as a child," she admitted. "My mother insisted on lessons even when we couldn't afford them." Her voice softened. "She said music is vital because it feeds the soul." Roy's gaze sharpened. "And do you believe that music feeds the soul?" The question unsettled her. It wasn't casual. It carried a weight she didn't understand, as though he were asking something far more profound. "I do," she said finally. "Music can heal. It can connect people. Say things words never could." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with something unnamed. Then Roy stepped further into the room, his movements precise, his presence filling the space. "Play something." Charlotte blinked. "Sir, play?" He repeated, his voice quiet but carrying the tone of someone accustomed to obedience. Her pulse quickened. "I haven't practiced in years." And the house rules, I'm amending the regulations, he cut in, his eyes never leaving hers. Play. Her throat went dry. This was a test, or a trap. Either way, refusing wasn't an option. Charlotte lowered herself onto the bench. Her hands hovered uncertainly above the keys. What should she play? Something technical, to prove skill. Something safe and simple. But as her fingers touched the keys, another choice rose unbidden. The Way You Look Tonight. A song her mother had once hummed in the kitchen floor, dusting her hands as she baked bread, her voice weaving warmth through their modest apartment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was honest. The first notes trembled, fragile and halting. Her fingers stumbled once, then found their rhythm. The melody unfurled, tentative at first, then stronger, filling the vast emptiness of the room with something soft, something human. Charlotte closed her eyes as she played, letting memory guide her. She saw her mother's tired smile, heard the laughter of neighbors drifting through open windows in summer, felt the pulse of a life that had once been simpler, poorer, but fuller. When the final chord faded, silence reclaimed the room. Charlotte exhaled, her heart racing. She turned, bracing for criticism, for dismissal, for cold words about wasted time. Instead, she found Roy, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His pale eyes, often hard and distant, seemed to hold depths she hadn't seen before. My mother used to play that song, he said softly. The words struck her like a revelation. For the first time, she saw not the Ice King, but a man, a son, who had lost something precious. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came. She could only watch as vulnerability flickered across his features, raw and unguarded, before the mask of composure slipped back into place. Lunch will be in 30 minutes, he said briskly, his voice again controlled, impersonal. I trust you'll have something surprising prepared. And just like that, he turned and left, his footsteps retreating down the hall. But something had changed. Charlotte could feel it lingering in the air, in the way the silence didn't feel as cold as before. She spent the rest of the morning preparing lunch with unusual care. Instead of the predictable salads and sandwiches, she crafted a meal that spoke of warmth and intention. A perfectly poached egg over a bed of mixed grains, drizzled with warm bacon. Vinaigrette, accompanied by freshly baked focaccia, its scent of rosemary filling the kitchen. When Roy entered, his expression was unreadable as ever. He sat and ate silently, each movement controlled. But Charlotte noticed how he lingered over the first bite, and how his gaze softened slightly as he tasted the bread. He finished every morsel, and when she cleared the dishes, his eyes followed her with a question unspoken. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked at last. Charlotte hesitated. My mother. She said cooking was an act of love. You could tell everything about a person by how they fed the people they cared about. Roy studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly. And what does this meal tell you about me? The question startled her. She met his gaze, looking at him, not at the sharp suit, not at the carefully cultivated image, but at the man sitting across from her shoulders, weighted with silence. It tells me you're hungry, she said quietly. Not just for food. The words hung in the air, dangerous and bold. Roy's gaze sharpened. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd gone too far. He would lash out and remind her of boundaries. Instead, he leaned back slowly, his pale eyes never leaving hers. You're not like the others, he said finally. No, sir, Charlotte replied softly. I'm not. He studied her for another long moment, then rose. This conversation never happened. His voice was clipped, but lacking its usual icy edge. And yet Charlotte could not shake the feeling that a crack had formed in the walls he had built around himself, a fragile crack that might grow. That evening, as the mansion settled into silence, Charlotte sat in her quarters and stared at the gardens beyond her window. In the distance, she saw the light still burning in Roy's study. She thought of his voice when he spoke of his mother, of the way his mask had slipped, revealing grief, perhaps even longing. Everyone called him the Ice King, but ice could melt. Charlotte hugged her knees to her chest, her thoughts tangled. She had come here for survival, for a paycheck, her mother, and stability. Yet something told her this job was becoming something more, something dangerous. She was supposed to keep her head down, follow the rules, survive. But what if her most significant risk was not failing Roy Martinez's standards, but reaching the man behind them? The fourth morning at the Martinez estate dawned with the same hushed rhythm as the days before. Charlotte rose early, dressing with quiet purpose. Her body had begun to adjust to the mansion's relentless schedule. Coffee at 5:45, breakfast at 6, each action precise, each gesture deliberate. Yet beneath her growing familiarity, something restless stirred. It was Roy. Every encounter with him was a study in contrasts, his silence heavy, but never empty, his presence cold, but threaded with flickers of something warmer. Since the piano, since the song that had coaxed memories of his mother from the shadows, the atmosphere between them had shifted. It wasn't spoken, wasn't acknowledged, but it was there. That morning, as she poured his coffee, their fingers brushed again. She didn't flinch this time, and his gaze lingered a heartbeat too long. No words passed, but Charlotte felt the silent question hanging between them. Breakfast unfolded with its usual economy of movement, Roy reading reports, Charlotte clearing dishes. Yet she noticed how he hesitated before rising, as though reluctant to retreat to his study. A small change, but in a house where every gesture was choreographed, it mattered. By mid-morning, the cleaning service had left, and Charlotte busied herself organizing the pantry, humming softly beneath her breath. She didn't hear the car until it was too late. The smooth purr of an engine pulling up the circular drive, the echo of heels striking marble as the front doors swung open. "James, darling," a woman's voice called, light and musical, carrying down the hall like a shard of glass wrapped in silk. Charlotte froze. Her heart gave a startled leap. It wasn't just the familiarity in the woman's tone, but the ownership. Moments later, the source swept into the kitchen, as though she owned the house and the air within it. She was tall and willowy, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, and her clothes tailored to her body, like second-skin diamonds, glittered at her ears and wrist, subtle but unmistakable. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, landed on Charlotte. They flicked down to her modest blouse and skirt, then back up, and a smile spread across her flawless face. Not a kind smile, but the sort that dismissed before a word was spoken. "Oh," the woman drawled, "you must be the new help." Heat flared across Charlotte's cheeks, but she kept her composure, focusing instead on the plate she was arranging. "Victoria." Roy's voice entered the room like steel drawn across stone. Charlotte turned. He stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. The woman, Victoria, tilted her head and smiled wider. "Don't look at me like that, James. We said we'd give each other space, but 3 months is hardly a lifetime." Using his first name unsettled Charlotte, though she told herself it shouldn't. She had no claim, no right. And yet, the casual intimacy in Victoria's tone set her teeth on edge. Roy stepped further into the kitchen, his movements measured. "We agreed it was over." Victoria waved a manicured hand. "People say many things when they're hurting. You'd just lost your father. You weren't yourself. I was perfectly myself." The words were quiet, but Charlotte felt their weight. Victoria's eyes flicked toward her again, sharp and appraising. "And this? Replacement. How quaint." After the disaster with the last few, I suppose scraping the bottom of the barrel was inevitable. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the dishcloth in her hand. The insult struck like a slap, though she willed her face to remain impassive. Victoria. This time Roy's voice was not quiet. It cut through the room sharp enough to still the air. That's enough. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. I'm only stating the obvious. You're saying things that aren't welcome in my house. The shift in him was unmistakable. He moved closer, his posture changing into something Charlotte had only glimpsed before. Predatory, dangerous. You should leave. For the first time, Victoria faltered. Her eyes widened, her smile wavering. James, you can't be serious. We have history. We have nothing. He said, his voice deadly calm. We had nothing 3 months ago, and we have nothing now. I made that clear. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ticking of the clock on the far wall seemed to pause. Victoria's gaze darted between him and Charlotte. Something ugly flickered across her perfect features. I see, she whispered, her voice dripping venom. You've replaced me with the help. How democratic of you. I haven't replaced you with anyone, Roy said coldly. There was nothing to replace. The dismissal landed like a blade. Victoria's composure cracked, her face paling. For a moment, Charlotte glimpsed something raw, desperation perhaps. But then the mask snapped back into place. Very well, she said, her tone icy. Suppose that's how you want it. She turned on her heel, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. Charlotte stood frozen, the dishcloth clenched in her hand. She hadn't spoken a word yet, felt like she had been dragged into a battlefield she hadn't chosen. Roy remained by the window, his back rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. The air around him vibrated with fury barely leashed. Finally, Charlotte placed the plate gently on the counter. Dinner will be ready at 7. Mr. Martinez. Her voice was steady, but inside her chest ached. He turned then, and for the first time since she'd known him, his eyes weren't just cold. They were broken. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You shouldn't have had to witness that. Charlotte shook her head. It's fine. No, he said firmly, though his voice still carried that rough edge of grief. It isn't. She hesitated, then spoke before caution could silence her. You defended me. You didn't have to. But you did. Roy's gaze sharpened. She was out of line. She was. Charlotte admitted. But you could have let it pass. You could have ignored it. Instead, you stood up for me. That means something. For a moment, his expression shifted, as though her words unsettled him more than Victoria's presence ever could. What do you think you are, Ms. Johnson? He asked softly, almost as though testing her. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. Someone who makes your mornings easier. Someone who knows how you like your coffee. Someone who plays piano because it makes you less tense, even if you don't admit it. His breath caught barely audible. You do that for me. I do many things for you, Mr. Martinez, she said quietly. The question is whether you'll let me. The silence that followed was heavy-charged. For the first time, Charlotte felt like they were standing at the edge of something precarious, something that could tip into disaster, or something entirely new. Roy finally looked away, his voice regaining its careful distance. Dinner at 7. But Charlotte caught that flicker in his eyes, that unspoken acknowledgement that the ground between them had shifted. That afternoon, the mansion felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with the echo of Victoria's laughter, cruelty, and accusations. Charlotte moved through her tasks quickly, but her thoughts remained entangled with what she had seen. Roy Martinez, the Ice King of Manhattan, had defended her. Not out of obligation, not out of appearance. but because something in him refused to let Victoria demean her. Charlotte realized this was more dangerous than any insult Victoria could have hurled, because it meant that she mattered to him in some small way. And if she mattered, then she was no longer invisible and no longer safe. The mansion was quieter that evening, though not in the usual way. The silence didn't feel sterile, nor did it echo with loneliness. Instead, it felt heavy alive with the aftermath of Victoria's intrusion. Charlotte moved about the kitchen, her hands steady as she sliced vegetables, but her mind drifted back to the confrontation she had witnessed. Roy's voice was sharp with command. Victoria's laughter was brittle and cruel, and above all when he had turned eyes breaking. He apologized to her. She had not expected that. Charlotte placed the knife down gently and leaned against the counter. She had come into this house prepared to endure indifference, prepared to swallow insult for the sake of survival. But she had not prepared herself for Roy Martinez defending her, not with such ferocity, not as if the insult to her was an insult to him. She told herself it meant nothing. It was only his pride sense of control and need to assert dominance in his own home. And yet, his eyes had betrayed something else. When dinner was ready, roasted salmon with lemon and dill and wild rice and a medley of late winter vegetables, she wheeled the cart into the dining room. Roy sat at the head of the long table, his posture immaculate as always, but his gaze was distant, his fingers drumming lightly against the table as though caught in thought. Charlotte set the dishes down and stepped back, waiting. He looked at her, then his pale eyes sharp yet unreadable. "Sit." The word startled her. "Sir, sit," he repeated, softer now but insistent. "I don't enjoy eating alone tonight." Her breath caught. This violated every unspoken rule that had governed her days here. But she obeyed, sitting opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a while, the only sound was the clink of silverware against porcelain. Roy ate with his usual precision, yet Charlotte noticed how his gaze lifted occasionally, studying her, as though trying to solve a puzzle. "You're not intimidated by her," he said at last. Charlotte looked up. "Victoria." He nodded once. Charlotte considered her answer carefully. "I've been intimidated by many things in my life, Mr. Martinez. But women like her, I learned long ago that their power comes from whether or not you let their words matter." His brow arched slightly. "And I assume her words didn't matter?" "They stung," Charlotte admitted, "but only because I knew she wanted them to, and I decided she wouldn't get what she wanted." Roy leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "You're braver than most people I know." Charlotte gave a small, wry smile. "No, sir. Just stubborn." For the first time, he almost smiled. Almost. It was fleeting, a flicker at the corner of his mouth, gone before it fully formed. But Charlotte saw it, and it struck her harder than any display of wealth or authority. They ate the rest of the meal silently, which wasn't uncomfortable. There was something almost companionable about it, as though the house itself had shifted to allow for this small, fragile moment. Later that night, unable to sleep, Charlotte wandered down to the gardens. The moonlight washed over the grounds, turning the hedges silver and the fountain into a shimmering veil. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the crisp air. Couldn't sleep either. She started turning to find Roy standing a few steps away. He wasn't in his usual suit, but a simple dark sweater and slacks. The softer attire made him look less like the Ice King, and more like a lonely man perhaps, who carried too much. "I didn't expect to see you out here," Charlotte admitted. "Sometimes I walk the gardens when the house feels too empty." His words surprised her. This house. Empty. He glanced around at the sprawling estate. Space doesn't fill silence, Charlotte. It only magnifies it. Using her first name struck her like a chord struck too hard. It was the first time he had said it. Charlotte swallowed. And does the silence bother you? His gaze drifted toward the fountain. It didn't. Not until recently. She said nothing, but the weight of his words pressed between them. They strolled along the stone path, the gravel crunching beneath them. The night air carried the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby hedge. Charlotte felt her heart racing, aware of every inch of space between them, and how little space there truly was. At the fountain, Roy paused. His reflection shimmered in the rippling water, fractured by light and shadow. "My father built this house," he said quietly. "Every stone, every detail. He believed perfection kept the world at bay. But perfection is suffocating." Charlotte turned to him, her voice soft. "Perfection isn't living, it's hiding." His head snapped toward her eyes, sharp. For a moment she feared she had gone too far. But then slowly, his expression shifted. Not anger, but recognition. "You're right," he murmured. They stood silently for a long while, the night wrapping around them like a fragile cocoon. Charlotte's hand brushed against the fountain's edge, her fingers grazing the cool stone. Roy's hand moved almost unconsciously until it rested near hers, not touching, just close. Close enough that the air seemed to hum, and then too quickly he pulled back. The mask slipped back over his features, the distance reasserting itself. "Good night, Charlotte," he said, his voice, even though his eyes betrayed something more. "Good night, Mr. Martinez," she whispered. The next day, the world outside their fragile bond intruded. At breakfast, Roy read the paper with unusual intensity, his brow furrowed. Charlotte caught glimpses of headlines. "Corporate hostile takeover, Martinez Industries under siege." He pushed the paper aside, his jaw tight. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. His gaze flicked to hers, sharp. "Nothing you need to worry about." But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the storm brewing in his eyes. And later, as she cleared the table, she found his phone buzzing with messages, names she didn't recognize, board members, investors, lawyers, each pulling him deeper into battles, fought not with fists, but with contracts and betrayals. Charlotte set the phone down carefully, her chest tight. She had stepped into his world without meaning, and now she could feel its weight pressing in, threatening to crush the fragile bond they were building. But even as the shadows gathered, she remembered how he had said her name in the garden, soft and unguarded. And she knew that whatever storms lay ahead, the ice was beginning to crack. The days that followed carried a weight Charlotte could feel in every corner of the Martinez estate. Once silent in its austerity, the air now throbbed with unspoken tension. Phones rang more often. Voices murmured behind closed doors. Delivery after delivery of thick files arrived, stacked neatly on Roy's desk by his assistants. The business world, the ruthless empire Roy commanded, was pressing harder against him. And for the first time since she arrived, Charlotte saw glimpses of him faltering. It began one morning at breakfast. She set down his usual black coffee, hot and sharp, and slid the plate of eggs and toast before him. Roy, usually precise in every motion, sat staring at the documents beside his plate. He didn't lift his fork, didn't glance at his coffee. His jaw was set, but his eyes were shadowed. Charlotte hesitated. Speaking during meals was rarely welcomed, but something inside her nudged her forward. "You haven't touched your food," she said softly. His gaze flicked up. For a moment, his mask cracked. "I can't eat when the company I built is on the edge of collapse." The confession startled her. Not the words themselves, she had already guessed much from the headlines she glimpsed, but that he had spoken them aloud to her. Charlotte pulled the chair opposite him quietly, lowering herself into it. "Then you need someone to remind you that you're human, not a machine." His lips pressed together, almost a smile, but not quite. "You're bold." "Not bold," she countered. "Just unwilling to watch you starve over paperwork." The corner of his mouth shifted again, and this time the faintest smile did appear. He picked up the fork. "You win, Charlotte." It was a small victory, but in the cold palace of his world, it felt monumental. By afternoon, Charlotte wandered into the library with her cleaning supplies. Roy was there, surrounded by a storm of papers. His jacket was discarded across a chair. His sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled in a way that humanized him more than any tailored suit ever could. She paused in the doorway, unseen for a moment. The man before her was not the unshakable billionaire carved from ice. He was tired. He was furious. He was human. And then his voice cut through the silence. "If you're going to hover, come in." Caught. Charlotte flushed and stepped forward. "I wasn't hovering. I was cleaning." He looked up, one eyebrow arched. In the doorway, she stifled a smile, shaking her head. "Touché." Something eased in the room. The heaviness shifted, if only for a breath. "You shouldn't linger here," he said after a moment. "These papers are poison. Lies and betrayals are printed in black ink." "Then maybe you need someone to stand between you and the poison," she said. His gaze locked on hers, sharper now, but not unkind. "And you would volunteer for that role?" "Yes," she hesitantly replied, "because someone needs to remind you that life is more than this war." The silence that followed was charged, the kind that made Charlotte's skin hum. He didn't reply, but his eyes lingered on her in a way that spoke louder than words. That night, Roy didn't appear at dinner. Charlotte waited, uncertain, before finally carrying a tray up to his study. She knocked once. No reply. Carefully, she pushed the door open. He sat slumped in his chair, a glass of scotch untouched beside him, his eyes fixed on the fire. The flames carved harsh lines across his face, highlighting the exhaustion carved deep into it. Charlotte placed the tray gently on the table. "You need to eat." He didn't move. "Roy," she said quietly. His name, his first name, slipped out before she could stop it. His head turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. And for the first time, she saw no armor, no mask, only raw vulnerability. "Do you know what it's like?" he murmured. "To watch vultures circle everything you've built, to see loyalty traded like currency, to realize you can't trust even the men you once called brothers." Charlotte stepped closer. "I know what it's like to be betrayed by those who promised to protect you." Different world, same wound. Something in his eyes flickered. Recognition. Understanding. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I should tell you to leave. I should keep you as far from this as possible." "Then why don't you?" His silence was answer enough. Charlotte moved closer to the fire, her hands clasped before her. "You're not alone, Roy. Even if you think you are. Even if you try to be." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the flames. Then quietly, he reached for the plate she had brought. He ate silently, but something in the air shifted with each bite. Not peace, not easy, but a fragile thread of connection that held them both. Beyond the mansion walls, however, the world was moving. Victoria leaned against the balcony of her penthouse in downtown Manhattan. Her red lips curved in a cold smile. She sipped her wine, scrolling through the financial reports on her phone. Roy's empire was wobbling. His enemies were circling. And she was feeding them. With every whisper, every leaked document, every carefully placed rumor, she pulled another thread from the empire she once had shared. She would have watched him burn, if Roy hadn't had her. But the image of Charlotte unsettled her and gnawed at her even as she plotted. The dark-skinned woman with quiet strength standing where Victoria once had stood. She remembered the defiance in Charlotte's eyes, the way she hadn't crumbled under insult. It infuriated her. "This isn't over, darling," she whispered into the night, her voice a venomous promise. Not by a long shot. Back at the estate, the storm pressed closer. The next morning, Charlotte found Roy in the conservatory. Sunlight streamed through the glass, gilding the sharp angles of his face. He looked up from the papers spread across the table, his voice rough. "They're coming for me, Charlotte. Every board member, every competitor, every so-called ally. They smell weakness. Then don't let them see it," she said, her voice calm but steady. His gaze pierced hers. "And what do you see?" Charlotte swallowed, her chest tightening. "I see a man carrying too much, refusing to let anyone share the weight. I see someone who would rather break than bend." For the first time, his eyes softened. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers, hesitant, uncertain, but real. The touch lingered electric. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low. "Maybe not," she whispered. "But I am." And in that moment, with the sun pouring through the glass and the storm gathering outside, Charlotte knew the truth. She was no longer just an observer in Roy Martinez's world. She was part of it. And that meant she was part of the danger too. The city was buzzing with whispers. Financial papers spoke of sudden shifts in Martinez Industries' stock, restless board members, and rumors spreading like wildfire through Manhattan's elite circles. Charlotte read the headlines in passing, her heart tightening each time she saw Roy's name dragged across ink. But she realized the danger wasn't confined to newspapers when she overheard the house staff speaking in hushed tones. There was blood in the water, and everyone could smell it. Roy bore the weight like steel, yet Charlotte could see the cracks forming. He worked longer hours, spoke less, and walked the halls of his mansion like a man at war. His suits were immaculate, his words precise, but his eyes, those pale, calculating eyes, had grown darker, shadowed by battles he couldn't name aloud. And yet around her, he seemed to soften. Not openly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but Charlotte did. She saw it in the way his voice gentled when speaking to her, when his hand would almost brush hers before he pulled away. He was trying to keep the world from swallowing her whole. She knew it. But the world had other plans. It began with an invitation. A gala at the Metropolitan Hotel, an evening drenched in wealth and glamour, a gathering of New York's most influential figures. On the surface, it was a charity event for medical research. But beneath the glittering chandeliers and champagne flutes, it was a battlefield where reputations were sharpened like blades. Roy's presence was not optional. As the whispers of his weakening empire grew, so did his need to appear untouchable. "I'll attend alone," he told Charlotte. That morning his voice, clipped, his tie knotted with ruthless precision. Charlotte lowered her eyes, nodding. It wasn't her place to question. And yet, her chest tightened. But fate, in its merciless way, had already decided otherwise. Victoria arrived at the gala in scarlet silk. Her beauty weaponized, her smile as sharp as broken glass. She glided through the crowd with the elegance of someone who knew every eye was upon her. And indeed many were, though not all out of admiration. Some watched for the spectacle she was sure to create. It didn't take long. "Roy, darling," she purred as she intercepted him near the entrance, her voice loud enough to carry. "How lovely to see you after all this time. But where is your little shadow? Surely you didn't leave her scrubbing floors while you came here alone?" Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Charlotte's name had not been spoken, but everyone knew whom Victoria meant. The servant girl, the outsider. Roy's jaw tightened. Watch yourself, Victoria. Oh, I am, she purred. The city is watching too, and they're very curious about the man who trades pearls for pebbles. The crowd murmured, hungry for scandal. Cameras flashed, and before Roy could respond, Victoria turned gracefully toward the doors. Perhaps, she said sweetly, we should invite her here. Let her see what world she thinks she belongs to. The word spread faster than wildfire. By the following morning, tabloids were ablaze. Who is Charlotte, the woman in Roy Martinez's mansion? Photos surfaced, grainy shots of her entering the estate, carrying groceries, wheeling trays. Each headline dripped with insinuation. Charlotte stared at the newspaper in her hands, her throat tight. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't asked for her face to be plastered across glossy pages labeled as scandal and spectacle. When Roy entered the breakfast room, his expression was thunderstruck. He snatched the paper from her hands, crumpling it into a fist. Please ignore it. I can't, she whispered. His eyes softened for the briefest moment. Then let me handle it. But she knew this wasn't something he could handle alone. Because it wasn't just his empire under attack anymore, it was her dignity. That evening, Charlotte stood before her mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was no longer invisible. She was seen, judged, dissected by strangers. And yet beneath the fear, another fire stirred defiance. If Victoria thought she could shame her into running, she was wrong. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, her dark skin glowing against the pale cream dress she had chosen from the closet Roy had quietly instructed a stylist to stock for her. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant, simple, commanding in its own right. When she entered the drawing room, Roy froze. For a heartbeat, the Ice King himself looked undone. "You're not going," he said, his voice low, taut. "Yes," Charlotte replied. Her voice didn't waver. "I am." His eyes flashed. "Charlotte, you told me not to let her words matter," she interrupted softly. "I won't hide because of her." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then finally he exhaled. The fight left his shoulders. "Then I'll be damned if I let her touch you," he murmured. The gala's second night was brighter, louder, and crueler than the first. Roy entered with Charlotte on his arm, and the room stilled. Whispers rose like smoke. Cameras flashed. Every eye turned toward them. Charlotte's heart pounded, but she walked steadily, her hand resting lightly on Roy's sleeve. She felt his strength radiate beside her, a shield against the storm. Yet she also felt her resolve burning from within. Victoria's smile faltered when she saw them. Only for a moment, but Charlotte caught it. And that fleeting crack was enough to steady her breath. "Charlotte," Victoria said, her voice dripping honey. "How brave of you to join us." Charlotte met her gaze unflinching. "Bravery isn't walking into a room, Victoria. It's standing tall when someone tries to push you down." The crowd murmured again, surprised, delighted, hungry. Roy's lips curved slightly, but Charlotte felt it, the faintest approval in the brush of his thumb against her hand. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She had expected the girl to wilt, to crumble. Instead, Charlotte shone brighter than the chandeliers above. And for the first time, the Queen of Manhattan society felt the chill of losing ground. The night ended with tension thick as smoke. Back in the limousine, Roy poured himself a drink, his hand steady, but his jaw clenched. Charlotte sat quietly, her dress shimmering under the dim light. "You shouldn't have been there," he said, his voice hoarse. "I had to be," she whispered. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. "And now you're part of the war." Charlotte's hand brushed his, tentative yet firm. "Then let me fight with you." The silence stretched electric. And then slowly, Roy turned his hand over his fingers, entwining with hers. Outside, the city roared with gossip and greed. Inside the car, in the fragile quiet between them, something more substantial than scandal was taking root. Something that even Victoria's venom could not extinguish. The morning after the gala felt different. The mansion, normally a fortress of silence, buzzed with a restless energy. Phones rang without pause. Emails arrived in torrents. Newspapers stacked neatly on the table bore headlines in bold black letters. Roy Martinez appears with mystery woman. From maid to muse. Who is Charlotte? The billionaire's dark secret. Charlotte stood in the breakfast room, her hands tightening around a porcelain teacup as the words blurred. Her face was on the front page. Her, a woman who had spent her life unnoticed, now splashed across tabloids for the entire city to dissect. She had expected shame, humiliation, but what came instead was fury, not at herself, but at the twisted narrative painted over her. She was reduced to a caricature, a gold digger, a scandal, a pawn. When Roy entered his presence, swallowed the room. He wore a charcoal suit, his tie knotted with ruthless precision, but his eyes burned with quiet rage. He didn't touch the food. He didn't greet her. He went straight to the newspapers, tore them into sharp pieces, and tossed them aside. Trash, he muttered, his voice clipped. Charlotte set the cup down carefully. They're writing about me, about us. No, Roy snapped, spinning toward her. They're writing lies. You are not to read another word. His protectiveness was sharp, but Charlotte raised her chin. I can't close my eyes and pretend this isn't happening. The silence that followed was tense, electric. Finally, Roy exhaled, dragging a hand across his face. His mask faltered, and for a moment she saw the man beneath, the one who feared not for his empire, but for her. You shouldn't have to pay for my enemies, he said quietly. Charlotte's heart clenched. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid, that she could bear it. But the truth was more complicated. She wasn't unafraid. She was resolute. I'm not made of glass, Roy, she whispered. I won't break. The day only grew darker. Outside the mansion, reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing as soon as a car approached the gates. Paparazzi followed Charlotte when she ventured into the city, their voices sharp questions, cruel. Are you with him for the money? Did he hire you as a servant before he made you his lover? Charlotte, how does it feel to sleep your way into wealth? The first time it happened, her hands shook so violently she couldn't unlock her car door. She managed to escape, but the shame burned into her skin. That night, she wept alone in her room, muffling the sound with her pillow. But the next morning, she stepped outside again. Head high, shoulders square. Roy noticed. He had been watching her more closely than he admitted, studying how she carried herself through fire. After dismissing his assistants one evening, he found her in the conservatory. She tended to a small plant, her fingers gentle against the fragile leaves. Why do you keep facing them? He asked, his voice low. Charlotte didn't turn. Because if I hide, they win. And if I crumble, you'll blame yourself. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across hers. You think I care about the gossip? I don't. Yes, you do, she replied softly. But not for you. For me. Her words silenced him. She finally looked up, her dark eyes locking with his pale ones. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. But Victoria was far from finished. She had tasted the shift at the gala, the way the crowd had murmured at Charlotte's poise, and Roy had stood solid at her side. It had unsettled her more than she dared admit, and so she sharpened her knives. Anonymous leaks appeared, online photographs of Charlotte in her cleaning uniform, bent over floors, carrying trays, blurred images taken from the shadows. From maid to mistress, one cruel caption sneered. Social media exploded with commentary, some mocking, some vicious, and a few kind. Charlotte scrolled through them late at night, her chest aching, her stomach tight. She had never sought the spotlight, and yet she was dragged into it by a woman who wore envy like perfume. When Roy found her sitting in the dark phone clutched in her hands, he took it without a word. He set it aside, then crouched in front of her. "Don't let her steal your peace," he murmured. Charlotte blinked back tears. "I can't do this." "You can," he said firmly, his hand brushing against hers, steady and warm. "You're stronger than she'll ever be. That's why she hates you." His words were meant to soothe, but something in his voice trembled. Not with doubt, never with doubt, but with something else Charlotte hadn't dared to name. That night, sleep eluded her. She wandered into the hall drawn by the faint glow spilling from under Roy's study door. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Roy sat at his desk, papers scattered like fallen soldiers. His tie was undone, his hair mussed, his eyes bloodshot. But what struck her most was the loneliness carved into his posture, the weight of a man who carried the world and trusted no one to share it. "Roy," she whispered. He looked up, startled. For a moment, the Ice King mask slid back into place, but Charlotte crossed the room before he could retreat fully into it. She said, "You don't have to do this alone," her voice trembling with fear and courage. His eyes darkened, storm and fire colliding. "Charlotte, let me in," she whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. And then slowly he rose. He stepped around the desk, closing the space between them. His hand lifted, hovering for a moment before it cupped her cheek. Her breath caught. "You don't know what you're asking?" he said hoarsely. "I do," she replied. Her voice was steady now. "I'm asking you not to shut me out." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Then his lips descended on hers. The kiss was fire-hungry, desperate, restrained only by the edges of their fear. Charlotte's hands curled into his shirt, pulling him closer as though anchoring herself. He deepened the kiss, his control fracturing each second, his touch fierce yet reverent. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. His forehead rested against hers, his voice raw. "This is madness," he whispered. "Then let us be mad together," she breathed. In the days that followed, their closeness deepened, not openly, not in ways the world could see, but in small moments, stolen glances and touches that lingered too long. They spoke less, but they felt more. Yet the storm outside did not relent. Investors pulled their funds. Lawyers circled like sharks. Victoria's whispers grew louder. Roy's empire trembled on the brink. One evening, as Charlotte stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the horizon, Roy came to stand beside her. His hand brushed hers, his voice low. "They'll come after you again," he warned. She met his gaze steadily. "Then let them, as long as you don't let go." He studied her, his jaw tight. Then slowly, he took her hand entirely into his, entwining their fingers. Outside, the world plotted their downfall. Inside, their bond burned brighter, fierce, and unyielding. And though both knew the cost of defiance, neither stepped back. For in the glass castle of Roy Martinez, where shadows pressed from every side, Charlotte had become the fire he never knew he needed. The world had always seemed relentless to Charlotte, but never more so than in the weeks following the gala. What began as whispered rumors had grown into a full-blown scandal. Her name, Charlotte Martinez, was no longer spoken only within Roy's mansion. It rang through news anchors' voices, echoed across social media, and appeared in countless headlines. She had thought the storm would pass, that public fascination might burn itself out. But Victoria had ensured it festered, feeding the flames with poisoned hands. It started with a leaked video. The footage, grainy but unmistakable, showed Charlotte in the Martinez mansion. She was carrying a tray into Roy's office, her uniform pressed neatly, her hair tied back. The clip cuts just as Roy appears in the doorway, glancing at her with an expression the camera twisted into implication. The caption that spread across networks was cruel in its simplicity. From maid to Mistress Charlotte's rise. Charlotte watched it only once before shoving the phone away. Her stomach turned, her chest tightening, until she could scarcely breathe. The world saw a scandal. She saw her dignity torn apart, reduced to a weapon in Victoria's arsenal. That night, Roy found her on the balcony, clutching the rail as if it might keep her from falling apart. "Look at me," he demanded, his voice rough with fury. She couldn't. Not yet. "Charlotte." His hand closed gently around hers, prying her fingers from the iron railing. "Do not let them shame you. They already have," she whispered, her throat thick. "The whole city sees me as—" She broke off, unable to finish. Roy's grip tightened. "The whole city sees what she wants them to see. But I know the truth, and so will they when I'm done." But his promise, though fierce, couldn't silence her fear. Because she wasn't just fighting whispers, she was fighting a world that thrived on tearing down women like her. The next blow came at a charity luncheon. Charlotte had insisted on going despite Roy's resistance. "If I hide, I prove her right," she told him, her voice steady, though her stomach churned. The ballroom was filled with silken diamonds, where laughter was polished and cruelty wore perfume. Charlotte walked in at Roy's side, her cream dress simple, elegant, defiant in its understatement. Whispers followed them like shadows. At first she endured. She smiled politely, spoke little, and let Roy's presence shield her. But then Victoria made her move. "Charlotte," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false delight. "What a surprise to see you here. I wasn't sure if this was your kind of crowd." The words cut sharper than glass. Conversations around them stilled every ear, eager for scandal. Charlotte's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. "I go where I choose, Victoria." "Oh, of course." Victoria's smile widened, sharp as a blade. "It's just so inspiring, really, your story. One moment scrubbing floors, the next." She gestured grandly toward Roy. "The companion of a billionaire. A modern-day fairy tale." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Charlotte's skin burned, shame and fury battling inside her. Roy's voice cut through, low and lethal. "Enough." But Victoria only arched a brow. "I only meant to compliment her. We all know how rare it is to see upward mobility at this level." Charlotte's hands trembled, but she refused to look away. She forced her lips into a calm smile. "If kindness is too rare for you, Victoria, I understand your confusion." The crowd gasped softly. Whispers swelled. And for the first time, Victoria's perfect smile faltered. But Charlotte's triumph was short-lived. Because later that night, as the city's gossip columns exploded with stories of the confrontation, a darker narrative emerged. Anonymous accounts claimed Charlotte had manipulated Roy, that she had plotted her way into his life. Some even suggested financial impropriety, embezzlement, theft, betrayal. It was no longer ridicule. It was character assassination. Roy's board of directors grew restless. Investors demanded answers. Rumors of scandal threatened contracts worth billions. "You need to distance yourself," one advisor insisted during a late-night meeting. "Appearances matter, Roy. If you're seen standing by her, the company bleeds." Charlotte overheard from the hallway. The words sliced into her chest. She didn't wait for Roy's answer. She fled before hearing whether he would protect her or his empire. That night, she packed a small bag. She didn't want to leave, but couldn't bear to be the anchor that dragged him under. She loved him. God help her. She loved him. But love alone couldn't rebuild a crumbling empire. When Roy found her in the foyer, suitcase in hand, his fury was like fire. "Where do you think you're going?" Her voice broke. I can't let you destroy everything you've built because of me." He strode forward, his presence overwhelming. "You think I care about contracts, about numbers on a page?" "Yes," she cried. "It's your life, Roy, your legacy, and I won't be the reason you lose it all." Silence crashed between them, sharp and unbearable. Then slowly, Roy stepped closer. His hand cupped her cheek, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes, cold to the world, were molten now, burning, with a truth he had never spoken aloud. "You are my life, Charlotte." Her breath caught. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice raw. "Let them take everything else. They won't take you." The suitcase slipped from her hand. Her fingers clutched his shirt, as though it were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. And in that moment, she understood he wasn't choosing between her and his empire. He was choosing her fully, ruthlessly, without hesitation. But Victoria had anticipated his defiance. If love made him reckless, she would strike harder. She arranged an exclusive interview with a major news outlet where she revealed twisted fragments of Charlotte's past. Fabricated debts, falsified relationships, lies packaged so neatly they sounded like the truth. The city devoured it. Headlines screamed betrayal. Stock prices dipped further. Charlotte, though blameless, became the villain in every story. And Roy faced the breaking point. His advisors demanded action. His empire hung in the balance. The choice loomed like a blade over his head: protect his company or Charlotte. The world expected him to choose the empire, but Roy Martinez was done playing by the world's rules. Roy stepped to the podium at a press conference called by his board with cameras flashing and reporters waiting to watch him cut her loose. His suit was immaculate, his face a mask of calm. Beside him, Charlotte trembled, every instinct screaming to flee. Then he spoke. Much has been said about Charlotte. Roy began, his voice carrying across the crowded room. Lies, slander, venom, and all of it is beneath the truth. He paused, his eyes sweeping over the room like cold fire. Yes, she worked in my home. Yes, she entered my life unexpectedly. And yes, his voice deepened, fierce with conviction. I love her, not despite who she is, but because of it. Because she is strong, because she is honest, because she has endured cruelty with grace. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras exploded in flashes. And if this company, if this empire I've built, cannot withstand the truth of my heart, then it was never worth keeping. Charlotte's throat closed. Tears blurred her vision. Beside her, Roy reached for her hand. In front of the entire city, he entwined his fingers with hers. The world roared with chaos, with scandal, with disbelief. But in that moment, Charlotte knew he had chosen her. Not as a shadow, not as a secret, but as the woman he would stand beside even if the empire crumbled to dust. And as Victoria watched from afar, her perfect smile frozen in place, she realized for the first time that she might have lost a war she thought she could never. Because Roy Martinez was no longer the Ice King of Manhattan. He was a man in love, and that made him unstoppable. The press conference had been a cannon blast across New York. Within hours, news channels replayed Roy's words on endless loops, analysts dissecting every nuance of his declaration. Some called it reckless. Others called it romantic. Investors panicked, competitors gloated, and society whispered behind crystal flutes of champagne. But a single truth drowned out all the noise, for Charlotte. Roy had chosen her. The morning after she woke in his arms, sunlight spilling across the silk sheets. For once, there was no mask on his face, no shadows in his eyes. He slept deeply, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, one hand still curled protectively around her waist. Charlotte lay there quietly, her fingers brushing his jaw. She marveled at the transformation the Ice King of Manhattan, feared by boardrooms and adored by tabloids, had risked everything to stand beside a woman the world wanted to discard. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a trespasser in his world. She felt like she belonged. The Empire, however, did not forgive so easily. By noon, Roy was on calls with his board. Voices rose, tempers flared. His declaration had rattled the foundation of Martinez Holdings, and half the directors demanded his resignation. Charlotte heard the arguments echoing through the mansion's halls. She stayed back, giving him space, but the guilt twisted in her stomach. His empire was bleeding because of her. When the meeting ended, Roy found her in the garden. His tie was loosened, his eyes sharp with exhaustion. Yet when he saw her, his expression softened. "They want me out," he admitted. Her heart clenched. "Roy." He brushed a hand across her cheek, silencing her. "Let them try. I built this company from nothing. If they think they can scare me into choosing them over you, they don't know who I am." Charlotte searched his steady and unyielding gaze and realized the truth. This wasn't just defiance. This was love as armor forged in fire. But Roy wasn't the only one transforming. Charlotte, too, began to change. For weeks, she had endured cruelty in silence. She had swallowed her voice, hoping to survive unnoticed. But Roy's public choice had given her something she hadn't allowed herself before: courage. The tabloids called her a scandal. Fine. She would answer them not with shame, but with dignity. When a journalist cornered her outside a cafe, microphone thrust in her face, Charlotte didn't flinch. "Are you exploiting Mr. Martinez for his wealth?" the woman demanded. Charlotte met her gaze calmly. "No. What I found in Roy isn't money. It's loyalty. It's love. And if you think those things can be bought, you've never known." The clip went viral within hours. People who had mocked her now saw a woman with fire in her voice, not a victim, but a fighter. Public opinion began to shift, not completely, but enough. Roy watched the video that night, pride flickering across his features. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her hair. "You're stronger than all of them combined." Charlotte smiled faintly. "I learned from the best." Victoria, however, refused to retreat quietly. The woman who had orchestrated so much venom now found herself cornered. Roy's declaration had robbed her of her most potent weapon: his silence. No longer could she manipulate rumors when the man at their center spoke the truth so boldly. In desperation, she called Roy, her voice honeyed and sharp. "You think this ends with one speech? You've tied your empire to a woman the city will never accept." Roy's response was ice. "Then let the city burn. I'll rebuild it with her." For the first time, Victoria faltered. She realized she had lost the war, not because she lacked power, but because she had underestimated the force of two people willing to fight as one. Weeks passed, and slowly the storm began to quiet. The stock prices steadied. Investors, seeing Roy's refusal to bend, grudgingly returned. Public fascination dulled, giving way to acceptance. Roy and Charlotte walked through Central Park one evening, the city lights shimmering against the dusk. For once, no paparazzi lurked, no whispers chased them. It was just them, hand in hand, and the chaos finally receded. Charlotte glanced at him, her heart swelling. "Do you regret it?" He stopped, turning to her fully. His pale blue eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "Loving you never. Risking everything for you. Always." Her breath caught. He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Because you're worth more than all of it. Every skyscraper, every dollar, every name etched into glass. You're worth everything, Charlotte." Tears blurred her vision. She cupped his face and whispered, You're worth my whole heart. Their kiss beneath the city's fading light wasn't their first desperate fire, nor their second reckless defiance. It was steady-grounded a vow, a promise that love against all odds had survived. Months later, the world had moved on. Scandals were replaced by new ones, names forgotten as quickly as they had been lifted. But Roy and Charlotte remained stronger, steadier, their bond unbreakable. On the balcony of their home, Charlotte painted as Roy watched. Her canvas was filled with bold and unapologetic colors, with strokes that told a story of fire and resilience. "Do you see it?" she asked, tilting her head toward the painting. Roy studied it quietly. "I see us." She smiled, her heart full. For the first time, the shadows of the past no longer haunted her. She wasn't just a name in headlines, nor a pawn in someone else's game. She was Charlotte Martinez, artist, lover, equal. And Roy, once the Ice King, had melted into something fiercer, a man who had found salvation in love. As the city skyline glittered, Charlotte leaned against him, whispering, "We made it." Roy's arm tightened around her. "No," he said softly, a smile curving his lips. "We're just beginning." And with that, the story of the billionaire and the woman who defied a kingdom ended, not with surrender, but triumph. Because love, fragile as glass and fierce as fire, had rewritten their destiny. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel so you never miss the next tale of love, resilience, and passion. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I can't wait to take you on the next unforgettable journey.